brutal punishments of enslaved women in ancient Athens you weren't supposed to know. Yet for Daphne, life was very different from the stories of philosophers and politicians that people admired in the streets. She was born into slavery, a life that meant work from the first light of dawn to the fading glow of evening, and little freedom beyond the walls of her master's house. Her mother had been a slave, and her mother's mother before her, and so Daphne's fate was set even before her first steps. From the moment she could walk, Daphne learned that her value was not in her dreams or desires, but in the work she could do. She helped her mother clean the large stone house they lived in, sweeping the floors, washing clothes in cold water, and carrying heavy pots filled with water from the well. She had to be careful in everything she did because mistakes could bring harsh punishment. Her master, a stern man with little patience for accidents, expected perfection. A dropped vase, a torn garment, or a spilled meal could mean punishment that would leave not only her body aching but her heart heavy with fear. The mornings were the hardest. Before the sun had fully risen, Daphne would already be preparing food for the household. The smells of bread, olives, and roasted meat filled the air, but she could not enjoy them. Her hands were raw from kneading dough, and her back ached from lifting heavy pots. She often watched the free citizens of Athens walking to the marketplace or gathering at the agora to discuss politics and philosophy. She envied them deeply. They could choose what to do with their days, speak their minds openly, and walk freely through the streets without fear. Daphne, however, had no such freedom. Every step she took was measured and controlled. Daphne's life also included tasks that required careful attention and skill. She was taught to weave, a skill that could take hours of patience. Using a loom, she would sit for long stretches, creating patterns of threads that her master would later sell or keep for his own use. If a mistake occurred in the weaving, it could ruin the entire cloth, and the punishment for such errors could be severe. Despite this, Daphne learned to focus deeply, finding a small sense of pride in her ability to create something beautiful, even under the weight of fear. Her work extended beyond the house as well. Sometimes she was sent to the market to carry heavy baskets of food or other goods. The streets of Athens were crowded with citizens, merchants, and travelers, and Daphne had to navigate carefully, making sure nothing spilled or broke. People often ignored her, seeing her as invisible, a shadow in the busy streets. But Daphne noticed everything. She saw the children laughing, the elders speaking passionately about laws and events, and the soldiers walking proudly in their armor. She longed to be part of their world, to have a choice in her life, but she knew that as an enslaved woman, such dreams were dangerous. Life inside the household was no less demanding. The mistress of the house expected her to be polite, quiet, and attentive at all times. Daphne learned to move silently, to anticipate needs before they were spoken aloud. She served meals, cleaned dishes, and helped with the children of the household, who were often spoiled and demanding. If she faltered in any way, she faced not just punishment from her master but sharp words or even physical discipline from the mistress. Every action was watched and every mistake magnified. Yet, despite the fear and hard work, Daphne's mind wandered. She listened carefully when she could, picking up words from conversations between free citizens or from the philosophers who sometimes visited the house. She learned about Athens, history, its heroes, and its thinkers. These stories became her secret treasure, a small escape from the harsh reality of her life. She imagined herself walking freely through the agora, speaking her thoughts, and living a life that belonged to her. These dreams gave her a quiet strength, a reminder that her spirit was still her own, even if her body was not. Daphne also noticed the relationships between the enslaved women around her. Many had been in the household for years, learning to endure the demands of the master and mistress. They shared quiet smiles when a difficult task was completed successfully, or offered a comforting hand when someone was punished. These small acts of kindness were precious, like tiny lights in a dark room. Daphne learned from them that even in the harshest conditions, human compassion could survive. It became a way to endure, a silent rebellion against the cruelty that surrounded them. Evenings were a mix of exhaustion and tension. After a long day of work, Daphne often had to help with dinner, clean the house, and prepare for the next day. Her hands were blistered, her back ached, and her body cried for rest, but there was little time to recover. Sleep came fitfully, often interrupted by fear of what the next day might bring. Sometimes she dreamt of freedom, of running through the streets of Athens without chains or duties. But those dreams were fragile and fleeting, replaced quickly by the reality of her life in the household. Through it all, Daphne learned to be careful with her words. Speaking too freely could draw punishment or anger. She observed the citizens, learning the ways they spoke, the rules of behavior, and the hidden codes of the household. Knowledge became a form of protection. She noticed who was strict, who was kind, and who could be persuaded with careful words. This awareness allowed her to survive, to avoid the worst punishments, and to maintain a small sense of control in a life where control was almost always taken away. In the quiet moments, Daphne also began to understand the wider world. She saw that Athens, while praised for democracy and culture, had a dark side that few wanted to discuss. The freedom of some depended on the enslavement of others. She noticed that the citizens' pride in their city often ignored the suffering of women like her. This understanding was painful, but it also gave her clarity. She realized that the stories she loved, the tales of heroes and gods, often excluded women like her. Her life was not recorded in history books, yet it was as real, as significant, and as full of struggle as any of the tales told in the city. Daphne's youth passed quickly, shaped by work, fear, and the small joys she could claim in secret. She learned skills that were valuable to her household, became strong and resilient, and found ways to endure without breaking. She discovered that survival required patience, observation, and occasional cleverness. Every day was a test, every task a challenge, and every interaction a negotiation of power. But within her, a quiet determination began to grow, a desire not only to survive but to retain her humanity, her sense of self, and her hope. By the time Daphne reached young adulthood, she had already experienced more hardship than many free citizens could imagine. She had seen punishment inflicted on herself and others, had learned the unspoken rules of her world, and had discovered the small sources of comfort and solidarity that allowed enslaved women to endure. She understood that her life was controlled by others, but she also knew that her mind and spirit could remain free, even if her body could not. And so Daphne's story, like the stories of countless enslaved women in Athens, began with hard labor, fear, and invisibility, but also with courage, intelligence, and a quiet resilience. Her daily life was a testament to survival in a world that denied her freedom, and the small victories she claimed each day would shape the way she faced the brutal realities ahead. Though history might forget her name, her experiences, her endurance, and her spirit were as important as any story told in the grand halls of Athens. Life for Daphne grew more challenging as she entered her late teens. Though she had become skilled in her work and careful in her actions, she could never fully escape the constant threat of punishment. Every household had its rules, and the master or mistress expected strict obedience. The smallest mistake, even an accident, could bring harsh consequences. Daphne had seen it too often. She had watched other enslaved women punished for dropping a dish, speaking out of turn, or failing to complete a task on time. These punishments were meant to teach obedience, but they often left fear and sorrow in their wake. Punishments could take many forms. Some were physical, like whipping or being confined to a small room for hours. Others were humiliating, such as being made to stand in public while the household scolded the woman for her mistake. Some punishments were quiet but painful, like being denied food or sleep for days. Daphne learned that these punishments were not always fair. They were not based on the severity of the mistake, but often on the mood of the master or mistress. One day, a woman might be punished harshly for a minor slip. The next day, a serious error might pass with only a warning. This unpredictability made every moment tense, and every task a careful test of attention and skill. Daphne remembered one particular incident that stayed with her. A young woman in the household, Myrine, had accidentally spilled a pitcher of water while carrying it to the kitchen. The water soaked the floor and splashed onto the expensive garments of the mistress. The woman's punishment was swift and harsh. She was forced to scrub the floors until her hands were raw and her knees ached. Then she had to kneel in the courtyard in the sun, while the other household members watched. Daphne and the other enslaved women could not help but feel sorrow and fear as they saw the humiliation and pain inflicted for a simple mistake. It was a lesson that lingered in Daphne's mind. Perfection was demanded, and mercy was rare. Despite the fear, Daphne tried to remain focused on her work. She learned to anticipate the needs of her mistress before they were spoken aloud. She carried heavy loads carefully, cleaned the house thoroughly, and made sure every meal was prepared to the highest standard. Even with all her effort, she knew that mistakes could still happen. A dropped vase, a burnt loaf of bread, or a forgotten task could undo hours of careful work. She also learned to navigate the moods of the household members, noting when they were more impatient or when they seemed distracted. This awareness helped her avoid punishment and survive in a world where control was often taken from her. The punishments were not only physical but also emotional. Enslaved women were often shamed or belittled in front of others. The mistress might scold a woman harshly, calling her careless or useless, while the master watched silently. This public humiliation was meant to teach obedience but also left deep scars on the heart. Daphne saw how these punishments affected the women around her. Some became withdrawn, afraid to speak or act. Others grew resentful but could do nothing to change their situation. Daphne learned to hide her feelings, to smile when required, and to keep her sorrow and anger private. Food and sleep were also tools of control. Enslaved women sometimes received smaller portions than the household members or were forced to eat after everyone else had finished. Sleep could be limited, especially during busy seasons or when the master needed assistance late at night. These forms of deprivation made daily life even more exhausting. Daphne had to find small ways to care for herself, resting when she could, sharing a quiet moment with other enslaved women, and conserving energy for the long day ahead. These small acts of self-preservation were essential for surviving the constant demands and punishments. Work was never-ending, and it came with constant pressure. In addition to household chores, Daphne sometimes helped with tasks outside the home, like carrying goods to the market or assisting in temple duties. The streets of Athens were busy and crowded, and accidents could easily happen. If a basket of goods fell or a cloth was damaged, punishment could follow. Daphne learned to carry items carefully, move quickly yet cautiously, and watch her surroundings closely. She also learned to support the younger enslaved women, guiding them to avoid mistakes and protecting them from harsh treatment whenever possible. Despite the dangers, Daphne found moments of quiet resilience. She formed small bonds with other enslaved women, offering comfort and advice. They shared whispered stories at night, gave each other small gifts when they could, and celebrated minor successes together. These moments of solidarity were precious, providing emotional strength that helped them endure the harsh realities of daily life. Even under punishment and strict control, human compassion persisted, and Daphne learned that helping others could also protect herself. Daphne also began to notice the patterns of punishment. Certain mistakes were punished more severely than others, and certain members of the household were stricter than others. Observing carefully, she learned when it was safest to speak and when to remain silent. She developed a quiet awareness, a skill of reading moods and predicting reactions. This skill was essential for survival, allowing her to avoid unnecessary punishment while completing her duties effectively. Punishments were also a reminder of the lack of freedom in her life. Unlike free citizens, enslaved women had no control over their futures. Their labor, their bodies, and their lives belonged to someone else. Even small freedoms like choosing when to rest or what to eat were denied. Daphne dreamed of walking through the streets of Athens freely, speaking her thoughts and making choices about her life. These dreams were fragile but important, giving her hope and a reason to endure each day. The psychological burden of punishment was heavy. Enslaved women lived with constant anxiety, knowing that at any moment a small error could lead to suffering. Daphne learned to manage this fear, using it as a tool to stay alert and careful. Yet she also found ways to protect her spirit. She read secretly when she could, listened to stories from older women, and imagined a life beyond the household walls. These mental escapes were vital, allowing her to maintain a sense of self and resilience even when her body was controlled by others. The unpredictability of punishment also taught Daphne patience and strategic thinking. She learned when to act quickly, when to wait, and how to manage multiple tasks without drawing attention. She observed the masters and mistresses, understanding their moods and expectations. By anticipating their needs, she could reduce the likelihood of punishment. These skills became second nature, allowing her to navigate the complex dynamics of power in the household. Even in the face of harsh punishments, Daphne retained small sources of joy. She found beauty in simple moments. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows, the taste of fresh bread she helped bake, the quiet laughter of children in the courtyard. These small pleasures were private treasures, moments where she could remember that life, even under slavery, held beauty. They reminded her that she was still human, capable of feeling and appreciating the world around her, even if her freedom was denied. Through all these experiences, Daphne grew stronger. She understood that survival required not only physical endurance but also mental resilience. Punishment was a constant threat, but it did not have to define her spirit. She learned to adapt, to protect herself and others, and to find meaning and hope in a world designed to strip her of both. Her daily life, filled with work, fear, and occasional kindness, became a story of quiet courage and determination. By the time she reached adulthood, Daphne had experienced the full weight of punishment and control in ancient Athens. She had seen the consequences of mistakes, the fear instilled by harsh masters, and the powerlessness of enslaved women. Yet she had also learned to survive, to protect herself and others, and to find moments of hope and humanity amid cruelty. Her life, like the lives of countless other enslaved women, was a testament to endurance and the human spirit, even when freedom seemed impossible. Daphne's story in this part of her life shows that slavery was not only about forced labor, but also about the constant presence of fear and punishment. The harsh reality of enslaved women's daily existence is often forgotten in history, but it shaped their resilience, intelligence, and quiet acts of bravery. Each day was a challenge, each task a test, and each punishment a reminder of the fragile nature of their lives. Yet through it all, Daphne and women like her found ways to survive, to endure, and to maintain a sense of self in a world that demanded submission. Even though Daphne had learned to navigate the demands and punishments of her household, much of her suffering was quiet and hidden. While citizens of Athens walked freely in the sunlit streets, praised for their knowledge and participation in city life, Daphne and other enslaved women lived in shadows, performing endless work that went unnoticed. They were expected to keep the household running perfectly, yet no one celebrated their labor or acknowledged their hardships. To outsiders, the world of enslaved women was invisible, and this invisibility added another layer of suffering. Daphne often reflected on how unfair her life was. She worked tirelessly from dawn to dusk, performing every task with care and skill, yet she had no ownership over her efforts. The fruits of her labor, the meals she prepared, the garments she wove, the children she cared for belonged to her master and mistress. She received no praise, no rewards, and no recognition. Even when she performed flawlessly, the household treated it as nothing more than her duty. This lack of acknowledgement weighed heavily on her spirit, making her long for even a small sign that her existence mattered. The hidden suffering of enslaved women was also emotional. Daphne had witnessed young women separated from their families, sold to other households far from home. Mothers were torn from their children, sisters from each other, and friends were lost to distant places. Each loss left a wound that could not be healed. Daphne remembered a woman named Clee, who had been her friend since childhood. Clee was sold to another master in a distant town, and Daphne never saw her again. The grief was quiet but deep, a pain that could not be shared openly. Yet in silence, the enslaved women comforted each other, offering a shoulder to lean on and a listening ear. In addition to emotional suffering, there was also physical hardship that often went unnoticed. Enslaved women were responsible for heavy labor, carrying water from wells, lifting large pots of food, grinding grain, weaving textiles, and cleaning vast houses. Their bodies bore the weight of endless work, often without proper rest or nutrition. Hands were cracked from constant washing, backs ached from bending and lifting, and feet were sore from long hours on stone floors. Despite the exhaustion, they had to remain alert and ready to respond to the commands of their masters. Any sign of weakness could draw criticism or punishment. Daphne had learned to push her body beyond its limits, often ignoring pain to ensure her tasks were completed perfectly. The lack of privacy added to the hidden suffering. Enslaved women had little control over their personal space or time. Their lives were observed constantly, from the moment they awoke to the moment they went to sleep. Even when they were resting or eating, they could not be sure they were alone. Every word spoken, every movement could be judged. Daphne often longed for a quiet corner where she could think, write, or dream without fear of observation. Such spaces were rare, but when she found them, even for a few moments, she felt a small freedom that nourished her spirit. Education, knowledge, and personal growth were also denied to enslaved women. Citizens of Athens attended schools, listened to philosophers, and engaged in debates about laws and justice. Daphne, by contrast, had to learn through observation, picking up fragments of knowledge from overheard conversations. She read secretly whenever she could, copying letters and words from scraps of parchment. Knowledge became a quiet rebellion, a way to maintain a sense of self despite the oppression surrounding her. Daphne understood that while her body was enslaved, her mind could remain free if she nurtured it carefully. Friendship and solidarity among enslaved women became lifelines in the midst of suffering. Daphne formed close bonds with a few trusted women in the household. They shared stories, whispered encouragement, and celebrated small victories together, like completing a difficult task without mistake or successfully avoiding punishment. These connections were crucial for survival. They reminded Daphne that she was not alone, that other women endured similar hardships, and that together they could find ways to cope with the harsh realities of their lives. Even small joys were acts of quiet resistance. Daphne would secretly admire the flowers in the courtyard, trace patterns in the dust, or hum a tune when she thought no one was listening. These seemingly minor acts allowed her to assert a small sense of independence, a reminder that her spirit remained alive despite the control imposed on her body. In moments like these, she could imagine a life beyond the walls of the household, even if only for a few fleeting minutes. The hidden suffering also included constant vigilance. Daphne had to observe everything around her, from the moods of the household members to the condition of the home itself. A misplaced object, a spilled drink, or a torn garment could bring punishment. Her awareness became a survival skill, allowing her to anticipate problems and act before mistakes occurred. Yet this constant alertness was exhausting, both physically and mentally. Daphne often went to bed feeling drained, her mind still racing with concerns about the next day. Daphne's hidden suffering was compounded by the lack of legal or social protection. Enslaved women had no rights, no voice in the city, and no recourse if treated unfairly. Their lives were at the mercy of their masters, and justice rarely reached them. Any complaint or appeal could result in further punishment. Daphne understood this deeply. She learned to navigate the household carefully, speaking only when necessary, observing silently, and keeping her thoughts private. Her survival depended on discretion, patience, and the ability to endure hardship without complaint. Yet, even in the midst of hidden suffering, Daphne found purpose. She cared for the younger children in the household, taught them small lessons, and provided comfort when they were frightened. She helped new enslaved women adjust to the household, offering guidance and protection where she could. These acts of care gave her a sense of agency, a way to make a difference despite the limits imposed on her life. Daphne discovered that even small gestures of kindness could be powerful, providing light in a world dominated by control and fear. Daphne also began to notice the inequalities within the household. Some enslaved women were treated slightly better due to skill, temperament, or favor with the mistress, while others endured harsher work and punishment. Daphne understood that fairness was rare, but she also saw opportunities to support those who were more vulnerable. She shared knowledge, offered advice, and quietly intervened when she could, protecting younger or weaker women from unnecessary suffering. These small acts strengthened the bonds among the enslaved women and created a network of support that helped them endure together. The psychological toll of hidden suffering was profound. Enslaved women lived with constant fear, anxiety, and uncertainty. Daphne learned to control her emotions, hiding sadness, frustration, or anger from those who could punish her. She discovered that survival required not only physical strength but also mental resilience. Her ability to endure hardship without breaking became a source of quiet pride. She realized that while her life was constrained, her spirit and determination could remain intact. Daphne's hidden suffering also shaped her understanding of the world. She observed the contrast between the freedoms of citizens and the constraints placed on enslaved women. She saw the privileges, rights, and respect afforded to some, while others were denied even basic dignity. This awareness was painful but empowering. It gave Daphne insight into the structures of power, control, and inequality that governed Athens. She learned to navigate these structures carefully, using knowledge, discretion, and empathy as tools for survival. Through all these hidden struggles, Daphne's resilience grew. She discovered that even in the most challenging circumstances, she could maintain her humanity. She nurtured hope, formed bonds, learned skills, and found small moments of joy and freedom. Each day was difficult, yet she endured. Her life was a story of quiet courage, a testament to the strength of women who survived in a world that often ignored their suffering. By the time Daphne reached early adulthood, she had experienced countless forms of hidden suffering. She had endured physical hardship, emotional pain, isolation, and fear. Yet she had also found solidarity, knowledge, and small joys that sustained her spirit. Her life demonstrated that even in oppression, human resilience could thrive. The hidden stories of women like Daphne reveal the depth of endurance, intelligence, and compassion that flourished despite the harsh conditions of slavery. Daphne's story in this part of her life emphasizes that suffering is not always visible. Many of the struggles enslaved women faced were unseen, private, and silenced. Their labor went unrecognized, their pain ignored, and their voices unheard. Yet within these hidden spaces, women like Daphne found ways to survive, to protect each other, and to maintain a sense of self. Their lives were shaped by endurance, courage, and quiet resistance, forming a hidden history that is as important as the grand tales of Athens' public life. Even when the world did not acknowledge their suffering, Daphne and the women around her refused to let it break them entirely. They discovered that survival depended not only on avoiding punishment, but also on nurturing the mind, heart, and spirit. They learned to support each other, find small moments of joy, and maintain hope for a better future, even if that future seemed distant or impossible. Daphne's experiences in this period of hidden suffering shaped the woman she would become, strong, wise, and quietly courageous. Even though Daphne had grown used to the harsh realities of her life, she discovered that enslaved women were not merely victims of circumstance. Quiet acts of resistance and small victories became their way of claiming some control over their lives. These actions were subtle but meaningful, often unnoticed by their masters and mistresses, yet they offered a sense of empowerment and hope. Daphne learned that surviving with dignity required courage, cleverness, and careful planning, and that even the smallest achievements could make life more bearable. One of the ways enslaved women resisted was by protecting each other. Daphne had watched her friend Myrine endure harsh punishment for spilling a basket of fruit. Though she could not intervene openly, Daphne quietly helped Myrine afterward, tending to her scrapes and offering comforting words. In small, private ways, enslaved women looked out for one another. They shared tips for completing difficult tasks, advised each other on the mistress's moods, and sometimes distracted the master when a minor mistake occurred. These acts of solidarity were powerful, providing emotional strength and reinforcing the bonds between women who faced daily hardships together. Another form of resistance was cleverness in avoiding punishment. Daphne learned to anticipate what might anger the household members and took steps to prevent accidents. She carried heavy loads carefully, kept objects in their proper places, and planned her tasks to avoid unnecessary mistakes. When mistakes were inevitable, she tried to minimize their impact, sometimes finding creative solutions to prevent detection. For example, if a broken cup could not be repaired, she might secretly hide it or place it where it would not be immediately noticed. These small acts were not rebellious in the obvious sense, but they allowed Daphne to exert a measure of control over her life. Acts of resistance also extended to the care of children and other enslaved women. Daphne often looked after the younger children in the household, teaching them lessons or keeping them safe from strict discipline. She also offered advice and guidance to new enslaved women, helping them adjust to the strict routines and expectations of the household. In doing so, she created a small network of support that made life more bearable. These actions were quiet, often unnoticed by the masters, but they strengthened the resilience of everyone involved. Protecting others became a way to assert humanity in a world that constantly tried to suppress it. Small victories provided a sense of personal pride. Completing a difficult task perfectly, earning the praise of a mistress, or successfully avoiding punishment could feel like triumphs in an otherwise controlled life. Daphne cherished these moments, knowing that even minor accomplishments were important. They reminded her that she was capable, intelligent, and resourceful. Over time, these victories built her confidence and reinforced her determination to endure the challenges ahead. Though her freedom was limited, her spirit could remain strong and resilient. Some enslaved women found resistance through creativity. Daphne, for instance, developed an interest in weaving patterns that reflected her imagination and experiences. She added subtle designs that pleased the mistress while also expressing herself in ways that were unseen by the household. Through her art, she found a form of expression that gave her a sense of identity and satisfaction. Other women might sing quietly while working, hum tunes to soothe children, or tell stories that carried lessons and memories. These creative acts were private and personal, yet they provided mental and emotional relief, offering a small escape from the rigid structure of their lives. Daphne also observed how courage could emerge even in the smallest actions. Speaking up carefully at the right moment, refusing to be intimidated by minor threats, or standing firm in a small disagreement required bravery. These actions were dangerous if done recklessly, but when executed wisely, they allowed enslaved women to assert their presence and maintain dignity. Daphne learned to weigh risk carefully, choosing moments where her actions could be effective without inviting severe punishment. Each successful act reinforced her sense of agency, proving that even under oppression, a person could exercise choice and influence. Humor and subtle defiance were also important tools. Enslaved women sometimes used jokes or playful remarks in ways that could lighten their burdens or challenge authority quietly. While these gestures had to be subtle to avoid punishment, they helped maintain morale and built a sense of community among the women. Daphne learned to laugh quietly at the absurdities of her life, finding relief in small moments of shared amusement. These small acts of rebellion strengthened bonds and reminded the women that they were not powerless, even if the world sought to make them feel that way. Resilience grew from endurance, observation, and knowledge. Daphne learned that the household was governed by patterns, the mistress's moods, the timing of meals, and the reactions of the master. By paying close attention, she could predict potential problems and act proactively. This skill allowed her to avoid punishment more often and to protect herself and others from unnecessary harm. Knowledge became a form of resistance, providing an advantage in a life where every mistake could carry consequences. Over time, Daphne realized that intelligence, patience, and careful observation were as important as physical strength in navigating her world. Community among enslaved women was another crucial aspect of resilience. They shared stories, experiences, and advice, creating an informal support system. They celebrated small successes together, comforted each other in times of grief, and offered guidance to newcomers. These relationships provided emotional strength, reducing feelings of isolation and despair. Daphne understood that survival was not just an individual effort but a collective one, where mutual support and solidarity could make life more bearable. The bonds they formed were a quiet, enduring form of resistance against the isolation imposed by their enslavers. Even acts of secrecy were forms of resistance. Daphne and other women often had small private moments where they could read, think, or imagine a life beyond the household. They kept these moments hidden, knowing that the masters would not approve. These secret acts preserved their identity, intellect, and hope. Daphne learned that private strength was as important as visible skill, and that a mind free to think, dream, and plan could remain untouched even under the strictest control. These hidden victories nurtured her spirit and gave her a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. Occasionally, resistance took the form of careful negotiation. Daphne learned to speak with tact, appeal to the more sympathetic members of the household, or delay certain tasks until conditions were safer. By understanding personalities and moods, she could influence outcomes subtly. These negotiations were not bold acts of defiance but strategic moves to protect herself and others. Over time, she gained confidence in her ability to navigate difficult situations and minimize the risk of punishment. These skills reinforced her independence and sense of competence, even within the strict boundaries of slavery. Acts of resistance were often intertwined with hope. Each small victory, whether preventing a mistake, offering comfort to a friend, or completing a task with skill, strengthened Daphne's belief that she could endure and retain her humanity. Hope became a guiding force, motivating her to continue despite hardship. It reminded her that her life was not entirely controlled by others, and that she could influence her experiences through careful action, courage, and solidarity. Hope was a quiet, enduring form of resistance, sustaining her spirit through every challenge. Daphne's resilience was also shaped by reflection. She often thought about the injustices of her life, the inequalities she faced, and the suffering of women around her. Yet she used these reflections not to despair but to strengthen herself. By understanding the system of control, she could navigate it more effectively. She could predict patterns, anticipate punishment, and find ways to protect herself and her friends. Reflection allowed her to turn knowledge into action, transforming awareness into a practical tool for survival and subtle defiance. Through these small acts of resistance, Daphne and the women around her created a private world within the household, a space where dignity, intelligence, and humanity could persist. Even under oppression, they maintained a sense of identity, nurtured relationships, and found joy in small successes. These acts were quiet and often invisible to outsiders, but they were essential for emotional survival. They demonstrated that even in harsh circumstances, courage and resilience could flourish. By the time Daphne reached early adulthood, she had mastered the art of subtle resistance. She understood that survival required intelligence, patience, and courage. She had learned to protect herself and others, celebrate small victories, and find hope in the midst of suffering. Her life was not free from fear or control, but it was filled with acts of quiet strength that asserted her humanity and dignity. Each day, she discovered that even under strict authority, she could retain her sense of self, protect her friends, and achieve small but meaningful successes. Daphne's story in this part of her life emphasizes the resilience of enslaved women. It shows that even in a world designed to control and suppress them, they found ways to survive, assert themselves, and protect their spirits. Small victories, cleverness, solidarity, creativity, and hope became tools of resistance, demonstrating that strength is not always loud or visible. Daphne's courage and ingenuity, along with that of the women around her, were testaments to the enduring power of human spirit in the face of oppression. As Daphne grew older, she began to think more deeply about her life and the lives of the women around her. The daily hardships, punishments, and struggles were not just challenges to overcome. They were a story, a hidden history that very few people knew or cared to remember. She realized that enslaved women like her were the silent pillars of Athenian society, working tirelessly to maintain households, markets, and temples, yet their contributions were rarely acknowledged. Their voices were absent from the public records, their suffering invisible to the citizens who praised Athens for its culture and democracy. Yet Daphne understood that their stories mattered, even if they were not written in history books. She reflected on the women she had known throughout her life. Clee, who had been sold away as a child, Myrrhine, who endured punishment bravely, and countless others whose names she could not remember. Each of them had lived with courage and resilience, finding ways to endure in a world that sought to control every aspect of their lives. Daphne realized that their strength was remarkable. They had survived through intelligence, careful observation, solidarity, and hope. These qualities, often overlooked by history, were vital to understanding the full picture of life in Athens. Daphne also thought about the lessons she had learned. Survival required more than physical endurance. It demanded mental resilience, creativity, and strategic thinking. She had learned to navigate the moods of her masters, anticipate potential dangers, and protect both herself and others. She had developed networks of support among enslaved women, creating bonds that strengthened everyone involved. She had found small sources of joy, moments of privacy, and ways to maintain her identity. These lessons were not only about survival, they were about preserving dignity and humanity in a world designed to take both away. As she reflected, Daphne understood the importance of remembering these hidden stories. History often celebrated the achievements of men, politicians, warriors, and philosophers, but the experiences of enslaved women were rarely recorded. Their struggles, acts of resistance, and quiet courage were left out of public memory. Yet these stories mattered. They revealed the human cost of freedom for some and the oppression endured by others. They demonstrated that courage and resilience could exist even in the harshest conditions. Daphne knew that remembering these stories was a way to honor the women who had lived, suffered, and survived before her. Daphne also thought about hope and legacy. Even though enslaved women had little control over their lives, their actions had lasting effects. By protecting children, caring for younger women, and forming bonds of solidarity, they influenced the lives of others in meaningful ways. The kindness, guidance, and wisdom they shared created ripples that extended beyond the walls of the household. Daphne realized that these small acts, though often hidden, were powerful. They shaped the lives of others and ensured that the strength and resilience of enslaved women endured in ways that history might never fully record. Her own life became a testament to endurance and subtle triumphs. Daphne had faced punishments, fear, and invisibility, yet she had survived. She had found ways to assert her humanity, protect others, and nurture her spirit. Every careful decision, every act of kindness, and every small victory contributed to a life that, though constrained, was meaningful. Daphne understood that legacy was not only about public recognition. It was about the impact one had on the people around them and the lessons one left behind. In this way, the stories of enslaved women like her could endure, even if history often ignored them. Daphne also recognized the value of hope. It was hope that had sustained her through the hardest days, given her strength when punishment seemed unbearable, and allowed her to find joy in small moments. Hope had guided her in caring for others, in forming bonds of solidarity, and in imagining a life beyond the household walls. It was hope that connected her to the women before her, who had endured similar struggles, and to the women who would follow. Through hope, Daphne understood that life, even under oppression, could be meaningful, and that resilience was a powerful force that transcended circumstance. As she grew older, Daphne took on the role of mentor within the household. She guided younger enslaved women, teaching them the skills and strategies they would need to survive. She shared her knowledge of the household's routines, warned them of potential dangers, and offered emotional support. By doing so, she ensured that her experiences were not lost. Her guidance helped others navigate the challenges she had faced, creating a lineage of resilience and wisdom. Daphne's influence became a quiet but enduring legacy, one that would continue even when she was no longer present. Daphne also began to observe the broader society with a new perspective. Athens was celebrated for its philosophy, art, and democracy, yet these achievements rested in part on the labor of enslaved people. She understood that the wealth and comfort of citizens depended on the unseen work of women like her. This realization was both painful and empowering. It revealed the hidden layers of society and underscored the importance of recognizing the contributions of those whose voices were silenced. Daphne realized that her life, and the lives of her fellow enslaved women, were an essential part of Athens' history, even if that history was rarely acknowledged. In her reflections, Daphne also considered the enduring strength of women. Across generations, enslaved women had faced similar hardships and had developed ways to endure and resist. Their courage, intelligence, and resourcefulness were remarkable. Daphne understood that their lives were not defined solely by suffering. They were defined by the ways they navigated hardship, protected one another, and maintained hope. These qualities created a legacy that could inspire others, reminding future generations of the resilience inherent in human spirit. Daphne's experiences also highlighted the importance of compassion. She had seen the difference that small acts of kindness could make, comforting a friend, guiding a younger woman, or sharing knowledge to prevent mistakes. Compassion was not only a survival tool, but also a way to assert humanity in a world that often denied it. Daphne understood that these acts, though seemingly small, had a lasting impact. They created bonds, nurtured resilience, and preserved dignity. In this way, compassion became a quiet but powerful form of legacy, shaping the lives of others and extending the influence of enslaved women beyond their immediate circumstances. As Daphne approached the later years of her life, she reflected on the totality of her journey. She had faced immense hardship, endured punishment, and navigated a world designed to control her. Yet she had survived, retained her humanity, and influenced others in meaningful ways. Her story, like those of countless other enslaved women, was a testament to the endurance of the human spirit. She had lived a life of quiet courage, using intelligence, solidarity, hope, and compassion to navigate a world that sought to limit her freedom. Daphne also understood the importance of memory. Even if history did not record the names and experiences of enslaved women, remembering their struggles and resilience was vital. By telling their stories, honoring their courage, and acknowledging their contributions, future generations could understand the full complexity of life in ancient Athens. Daphne's reflections became a form of remembrance, a way to ensure that the hidden voices of women like her were not lost to time. In her final reflections, Daphne recognized that her life had meaning beyond the constraints of slavery. She had endured, resisted in small ways, nurtured hope, and cared for others. Each act of courage, every moment of compassion, and every subtle victory was a testament to the strength and resilience of enslaved women. Though the world might not always recognize these efforts, they were important, enduring, and powerful. Daphne's story and the stories of women like her demonstrated that even in the harshest conditions, humanity, dignity, and hope could survive. Daphne's legacy, though quiet, was profound. Through her resilience, solidarity, and courage, she influenced others and preserved a sense of dignity in a world that often denied it. Her story reminded those who came after her that even in oppression, the human spirit could endure, and that small victories, acts of compassion and hope were powerful tools for survival. By remembering and honoring women like Daphne, history could acknowledge the hidden contributions that shaped society, giving voice to those who had been silenced for far too long. Daphne's life, when seen in its entirety, was a story of endurance, courage, and quiet triumph. It revealed the challenges enslaved women faced, the ways they navigated oppression, and the strength they drew from hope, solidarity, and personal resilience. Her story, though hidden in the records of history, offered lessons that transcended time, that even in the harshest circumstances, individuals could preserve their humanity, influence others, and create a lasting impact. Daphne's experiences, along with those of countless other enslaved women, formed a legacy that deserved to be remembered, honored, and shared for generations to come.